My name is Massimo Vignelli, and I like to be known as a designer. Yeah, I started to be interested in architecture and design when I was 14 years old, which is pretty early in life. And then I would start to look at architectural magazines, and then eventually I went to School of Architecture too, you know. But one of the things I learned very early is that an architect should be able to design anything from the spoon to the city. That was a famous phrase by Adolf Loos, a Viennese architect, you know, at the turn of the century, the other century. And I was fascinated by that idea, and then I've seen it that is true, and great architects like Loos and Hoffman from Vienna, again, were doing these kind of things. And since I was born and raised in Milan, architects in Milan, they were also doing all kind of things, you know. They were designing buildings and furniture and interiors and exhibitions and so on. Then I shared an apartment with Max Huber, a famous graphic designer from Switzerland. And so I learned graphic design, and I got full in love with graphic design. And so I was doing the whole thing, again, from graphics to architecture. So I built a house at one point for a client, and then I did the exhibitions, and then I started to do products, and you know, so that's the way I started. And I like it to try all the time, at that time, try different materials, different experiences. I was eager to try all kind of things, you know. And I suppose that attitude hasn't left me after a long, long life of design, anyhow, you know. So that's how I got interested in architecture and design. And naturally, since I was very curious about the protagonist of the modern movement in Europe at the time, by the time I got to at the University of Architecture, that means about 20 years old, I already met personally all the major architects in Europe, from Le Corbusier to you name it, all the others, you know, and country by country, and which was very exciting. You know, I was kind of a groupie, you will say, you know, and of course I was reading all the books about them and about what I had to say. And that gave me the critical strength or the critical background, you know, to approach architecture and design. Well, you know, when I started, it was a completely different set of tools than today. Somehow, you know, I like to divide our profession in BC and AC, you know, just like history. So BC is before the computer, AC is after the computer. Before the computer was extremely and intensively manual, you know, so of course I grew up with a pencil, and pencil was my computer at the time. And so drawing, and the tools of drawing were, you know, the usual ones, you know. And eventually then you graduate from the tools when the work increases and you start to draw by freehand, as precise as possible and as accurate as possible. And I was pretty good at that. So for me, 1 inch was a particular length, you know, both in centimeters or inches. And which is kind of important too, because it gives you a very good sense of dimension and therefore a good sense of scale. You know, scale is extremely important, you know. And scale is not dimensions. Dimensions are physical and scales are mental. And so without the knowledge of one, you can't get to the knowledge of the second one, you know, in a sense. Then there was a lot of glue, a lot of other materials, you know, pasting up things, you know, specifying type and losing type, and a very long and tedious process. Photostat machines, paste up again, you know, oh God, what a life. I spent 2/3 of my life for nothing, you know, in a sense. Then all of a sudden, God sent this incredible thing, which is the computer. It's like God sending Jesus Christ. It's that kind of a thing, you know. I don't believe in one or the other, but, you know, but I can't believe in the computer. And so that was the great Redeemer. So throw away all other kind of tools, and all of a sudden you could do things that were taking a long time to do. All of a sudden you can do it, and you can see while you're doing it. So that is a very, very, very exciting thing. Not only that, but you could do things better than ever in history. You can also do things worse than in history, you know, all the time. Most of the people do worse things than ever. But good guys, they make better things than ever. And so that is a great tool to work. And this is what we use all the time. Now, since I'm medieval, as you can see, you know, then I still use my pencil, you know. And I use the computer mostly for email and writing and things like that, and Googling, you know, and blah, blah, blah. And checking the words, you know, as you can imagine. Not being my first language, I have to check spelling all the time. and then I have, you know, people working with me, which are very, very literate in the computer, and so I can work behind them and say, a little bigger, a little smaller, yeah, like this, yeah, this is good, this is bad, try this, try that, you know. It's that kind of operation. But which is very funny, you know, in a sense. You cannot play the piano by telling the pianist what to do. Go a little more to the left or to the right, you know. And the same is with the computer, really. You have to play yourself to get the most out of it. But, you know, so it takes a long time to learn too, you know. So I don't think I have the time in my head to really use it in a good way. Computer is really like a pencil, you know, it used to be. You know, the pencil can do anything you want to, but you have to do it, you know. And the same is with a computer. It can do anything you want, but you have to do it, you know. It's a tool, you know. When it goes by itself, it's a disaster because it's a very seductive kind of tool. You know, the pencil, you leave it there, and it's dead. It doesn't do anything, in a sense. It doesn't move by itself. It doesn't offer anything. It's totally submissive to you. The computer instead, even by accident, offers you incredible, beautiful things that are very seductive. And if you forget about, or if you don't have an idea to begin with, it's very easy to be seduced, and that is not the good use of the computer, you know. So that is the way it goes. Well, you know, it should be visually powerful in the sense that I do not like design that is a flat tire, that has no tension, that has no guts, that has no expression, you know. This doesn't mean to be boom like this. It could be, on the contrary, extremely elegant. And by that I mean intellectually elegant, you know, not fashion elegant, not Morris elegant, but just intellectually elegant. That means a mind that is being cultivated and refined for quite a long time, you know, reading the best kind of books and really understanding how mind could be sublime, you know. And is you know what, intellectually elegance is exactly the opposite of intellectually vulgar, you know. And indeed, we are surrounded by a tremendous amount of vulgarity. Therefore, it is a strive to, you know, it is an effort to change that kind of situation. But it's very exciting because you have a sense of accomplishment, you know. And of course, you like to talk about, you like to convince people, tell people how to get away from vulgar, you know, situations into something which is a little more elegant, a little more refined. And if you multiply, then the world is beginning to get better. It takes a long time, however. Then the third thing is people are fascinated with trends. You know, trends are in the air. Everybody likes to be trendy, to be up to date. You know, but it's up to date today and it's gone tomorrow. You know, and if you are a responsible kind of a designer, you cannot design things that tomorrow are no good anymore. You know, you feel like cheating with your client and your public or your user, whatever it might be. You know, so you like to design something that is going to last a long time. And so you train yourself to be disciplined, and you train yourself to stay away from trends, you know, and in a sense you get automatically involved into the notion of timelessness. So things that last a long time. And my God, I can quote so many things. Let's say American Airlines logo I've done, you know, look how many have been done since I've done that one. I've done that 45 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago. And it's still there. It's the only one that's never changed. And how you can change it? How can you make it better? It's very legible. There's no tricks. It's half red, half blue. You know? What is more American than that? You give me one and I'll take a look. You know, the type is a type that will last forever, you know, and it's fine. Got so many, Bloomingdale logo, or a New York subway, or you know, I mean, plenty of things, you know, which are, and objects we have done, you know, plates like the Heller plates, you know, generations after generation grew up by eating on those plates, and they're still around today. Furniture that we have designed, you know, a long time ago, they're still there, and so on. So it is great to design things that stay a long time. They have a long staying power. And when you look at the antiques, well, they have a staying power, you know. So I kind of like the idea of designing things that 100 years from now will be looked with respect and not laughed about, you know, in a sense. Well, vulgarity is really the real ubiquitous thing, you know. Vulgarity is on everything, in clothing today, more than ever, is on printed matter, you know, cartoonish kind of things, balloons. Even the subway map has all those balloons. I mean, that's very low literary level. There is no need. You don't talk down to people. You talk up to people, you know. And that is the thing. So instead, most of the people, most of the manufacturers, they tend to design things to sell. They're more interested in the money side than anything else. And greed is really the religion of vulgarity, you know. And that is that kind of greed, you know, which everybody seems to have as part of a culture, more than any other place to a certain extent, maybe because it offers more, maybe because there is more buying power in the people, God knows, I don't know why, but certainly is, and you know why also, because it's a very young country, hasn't had the time to sift what is good from what is bad, you know. But like everything that is young is fascinating. You know? Well, number one, we like to design things which were bad before, so we have a challenge to make it better. The other thing, all the maps which were done at the time before our map, you know, were naive to a certain extent, you know. But we took a different, they were trying to be half geographic, half schematic, you know, and so on. Not very clear idea. And instead we took a very precise diagrammatic kind of a approach, a diagram based on a grid of, you know, 90 and 45 degrees, like the London map, which was done in 1931, you know, a long time ago. And we just did it, you know. Every line had a color at the time. Every station had a dot. No dot, no station. It's very simple, you know. And but very simple, however, is a process of sifting and sifting and sifting until you get just the essentials, you know, and all the trashy things are gone, you know. And that is a process that is typical of our modus operandi. I mean, what we do all the time, sifting, sifting. Actually, I'm not a designer, I'm a sifter. You know, I keep sifting everything, you know, all the time. My sift never ends. It keeps shaking all the time for everything that is around. And so that is the way it goes. Then in 1979 they changed the nomenclature, so the map that we had done was not good anymore for use, and so recently we redesigned the map according to the new nomenclature. So that's what we have done. It's kind of nice. It's already in so many museums that I can't believe it. And I hope we will do something with it soon. You know, so. It's a good map. But most of the maps today, they're done this way, subway maps. I mean, around the world. Paris has done a new one like this some time ago. Berlin, you name it, every major city uses diagrammatic map. It's only New York, which is kind of special. It still has this sort of a hybrid between, you know, a map and a diagram, but not even a diagram, not even a map, you know. But however, the problem with the existing map is too much information. It's a 5 pounds into a 1 pound bag, and no wonder it breaks. Well, we designed the signs for the historical district, the historical street, you know. And what we did that, you see again, you have to be aware of what is around. For instance, we could have done a completely new, different sign, but that would have been stupid. As a matter of fact, somebody else did that kind of a thing, and I consider a very stupid approach, because that's what it does. It adds to already very busy clutter. So instead, we took the existing sign, just changed the color. You know, so not only is it inexpensive to do it that way, but also it doesn't add another layer to the already very busy urban clutter, you know. So the problem of clutter is a big one. Of course, as a designer, and sifting, we try to sift out, you know, as much as possible, even in that kind of stuff. Yeah, you know, you have to know that, like every good designer, you know, you have a twin brother that is called ego, you know. And I go around with my ego all the time, and you should see how happy he is when he goes around in a most, you know, far away kind of place, and all of a sudden maybe a truck comes by with a logo that you have designed, or a book is on the window of a store, or some place has the furniture that you have designed, or the airline that brings you there has that. So it's kind of fun, yes, it is a lot of fun. Well, it's a gratification. It's a lifelong gratification. You know, but as I said, it's for my ego, to keep my ego happy. You know, if the ego is not happy, you're in deep trouble, you know that. Well, you know, you have to know a little more about the history of typography, or type, how it came about, you know. You know, well, it was invented, you know, at the end of the 1400s, you know, the Gutenberg, so to speak. And then for, you know, 200 or 300 years, it went with very few different typefaces, you know, very elegant, and that's it. Some publisher had the type, and printer and publisher was all one thing, you know. And there were very few, also because it was very difficult to cut type, you know. It was cut by hand, and no tools beside the chisel, so to speak, you know, and the type was small, you know. So it was a very refined kind of operation to do. And because it was refined, it was also quite elegant, you know. There was no room for vulgarity to get into it. So the basic typefaces done in those years, like Garamond, like Baskerville and Granger and so on, Caslon. They were quite elegant, very elegant actually, typefaces. Then the Industrial Revolution comes about, and then you can do the type in an industrial way, and with help of machines and so on and so forth, And then because you could do it, people start to do it. The founder start to do more type, and therefore they had to sell it, to offer it. And they found the right victim into the advertising people, which they thought that they should use a different typeface for every different client. They should not have two clients with the same type. God. And so that went on and on. It became a business, just like wallpapers, and it became a business to make typefaces. And then because of that, you got typefaces designers, people that got into the business, they like it, and they create nonsense type, things that were totally useless, and things of that nature, and on and on and on and on. And so eventually, you understand that the reason there are a lot of typefaces is just because it's a business, not a need. So you begin to sift. You begin sifting, and to see which one are appropriate for one user or another. And basically, as you know, the typefaces, they divide in two categories, which are called serif, the one with the feet, and sans serif without the feet, the straight one. And between one family and the other family, you begin to pick up the best. And at the end, when you pick up the best, you wind up with about half a dozen or a little more of typefaces, And those are good. Those are good for everything. Each one of those families is very large, so there are, of the same typeface, you have very thin or very big, very straight or italic, which is inclined, things like that. So yes, they're only good, maybe a dozen. I'm very generous today, St. Patrick's Day, but there is no more than a dozen. Actually, I don't use many more than 3 or 4 in my life, that is the thing. However, exceptionally, sometimes I might use some other too. But there is really not much more than a dozen of good typefaces, and the rest you can really thrash it. However, from a design point of view. However, it's a business that keeps a lot of people alive, and what do you want to do? What they will do otherwise. So let them do type if they like it. The only thing that is important to understand is when to use it and when not to use it, or what to use, And that good designer can come to it, and they can live very well along with very few typefaces. Every good designer doesn't use more than few typefaces. And when they're less good, the number increase. And if they're worse, they use all of them. Definitely, I was surprised and very, very, very pleased too. But it's incredible how many people really like the movie, people that have nothing to do with design, and how useful it has been. You have no idea the amount of people that mention this movie to me, everywhere in the world. I got email from everywhere in the world, talking about it. I don't say many things. In the disc, if you get the disc, at the end there are extras, which are better than the whole movie, really. They're terrific. So if you get the disc, it's fun. Anyhow, that is good. You see, Helvetica was born in 1957, around that time, 55, for a very precise reason. I remember before Helvetica, I was using similar typefaces and cutting together close, because we like type to be closed, But typefaces, they came with shoulders. And at that time, and the great invention of Helvetica was to make a shoulder very, very tight. So you could put the type straight. And it's the only type that had that. That's why. When we had that type that we could do that, that was BC, before a computer. Now with a computer you can even do that, you can do anything. But at the time, it had to be done by cutting you know. And so I lost a lot of type, a lot of letters by cutting and gluing and so on. But when Helvetica came about, that could be done fine, and that is why it was so successful. And I started to use and use. The more you use, the more you learn how to use it. It's just like a piano. The more you play it, the more you learn how to play it, and the better player you become. And so is with the type, you know. And it is a great typeface. It will last forever. You know, there are others. Some people like other variations of it. You know, I'm happy with that. You know, and I think it will last hundreds of years. You know, until people will write, at least. Along with the Bodoni, along with the Garamond, you know, along with the few of the great classic typefaces, you know, and that's it. Until we write, those faces will be around, I guess. Dimension is a measurable thing, entity, you know, that long, 6 inches, 10 inches, 10 feet, whatever it might be. Scale is a mental, you can say that an object has scale, a building has scale, or an object has scale, or a page, or whatever, if it's just right. You know, you feel it. Scale is a relationship between the object and the space surrounding it, you know, and that dialogue could be music, or it could be just noise, you know. And that is why it's so important, the sense of scale. And the scale relates to everything, the thickness of a pipe, you know, the thickness of a leg of a furniture, even color, you know, could have a scale. You know, let's say that if you paint a building shocking pink, that has no scale. That is just a huge mistake, but it's not, it's not in the scale of a city to have things like that, you know. So not only because it's not appropriate, not only because it's offensive to the environment, you know, not, I mean, for thousands, but among them also because that quantity of that color in the urban scale is out of scale. But however, out of scale is also a very fascinating thing. One of the greatest invention of pop art was really to bring an object which is usually like this, to make it huge. Oldenburg was really the great artist that did the best with that notion, you know. And I mean, we did also, for instance, one point, we did a line of cosmetics in the shape of nuts and bolts, and you know, screws and things like that, by just taking a little thing and making it big. The change of scale is a surprise sometimes that could be used in a good way, but again, you have to measure it and it should be appropriate. Appropriateness is another very important issue, you know, the notion of appropriateness. That means to design things which are right for that destination and not for another one, you know. And so when we start, we always look for what is specific of that particular problem so that we can design in the most appropriate way, as much as we can understand it, of course, you know. But appropriateness is important, discipline is important, and ambiguity is important. Ambiguity is not, you know, ambiguity for us Italians is a positive thing. But for the Anglo-Saxon, it's a negative thing. You know, it's a different culture. You know, if you come up with the Vatican in your pocket, you know, ambiguity becomes very natural. But for us, ambiguity is plurality of meanings, and that is why it's exciting. In the Anglo-Saxon dictionary, so to speak, you know, ambiguity instead is a negative connotation in the sense that is ambiguous, is you know, mellifluous, something that is neither here or there. And for us instead, here I say, here I deny, is a way of living. You know? But it's important in design too, because then it gives another level of richness, so that yes, it is that thing, but if you read it in a slightly different way, maybe it is something else too, and that might be interesting. But it's very, very dangerous as well, so one has to train. It's not for everybody. One of the greatest things about postmodernism is that it's gone. you know, Postmodernism was the 15 minutes of celebrity for those that would have never had it otherwise. you know, um, when you think of modernism, it's incredibly alive and is rooted, in hundreds of years, in a sense. I think modernism started in the during the Renaissance somehow, but really the modernism even more really started, I would say, with the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, 1750, around that time, along with the Diderot d'Alembert, in a sense, with industrialization, basically the first, the first sounds of industrialization. And modernism is alive and well, and while its postmodernism is gone, it had only one very good thing with it, is that somehow you restore interest in history, and that is very important. History, theory, and criticism are the most important aspects, in the development of design. But modernism is alive and well, as I said, and a lot of the young people are now working, along the modernist way. And there's no more postmodernism around. It's really gone, thank God, And, but of course, it's not a style. One is a style, is a dead thing. Modernism is an attitude, it's not a style. Modernism is a discipline, not a style. Modernism is intelligent, not a style. And so when you work that along those lines, you are a modernist designer, And that is what it's great about. So that will last forever, by the way. Well, we were lucky enough, to meet all the great masters of architecture and design, from Le Corbusier to Mies van der Rohe, from Alvar Aalto to Charles Eames. And it is nice to know them. And if you're not that stupid, they like you too. So a rapport is made, Anyhow, Corbusier was well, it was God at the time, you can imagine. So I remember one time we were traveling from Milan to Venice on train. He was going to give a lecture in Venice, and he was traveling with a friend of mine, an architect, very important architect, Rogers, at the time. And so, of course, I couldn't resist, and I went in the same compartment where they were. We started to talk, and I was doing a architectural magazine at the time. So, just like you, it was very interesting interviewing, the great master, And I remember one point he said, I was sitting next to Le Corbusier, and he said, wow, this young man has a lot of heat. It was summer. Maybe we were tied together. But it meant really the kind of, well, it was fun. And there are stories about every one of those big masters. One night we had dinner. We had several dinners in Chicago with Mies van der Rohe, because I was teaching at the Institute of Design in Chicago. And again, very exciting stories. He will he was a great storyteller, so he will tell stories of the Barcelona pavilion, how it came about, and all the things that happened during the construction. And all, I mean, a thousand of anecdotes, you know, from every one of them. And it was fun, it was fun. Is, so they, you know, as I said, I was a groupie, so really this is why I'm never annoyed wherever I go to give lectures and I see young students coming around, you know, they want a signature. And I understand that I was doing the same thing, so it's fine. I'm not annoyed by that at all. And, and I'm glad, actually. I'm glad that they have some examples, somebody in their mind that they, you know, is a mentor. And I mean, at the end of the day, that is the most gratifying thing.